The forbidden relic. The planet Cyphos-9 was a dead world, a place of endless ruins and forgotten history. Once, it had been the home of an ancient race, but now, only crumbling stone and shattered technology remained. Many had come here before, scientists, treasure hunters, and warlords, searching for something valuable, something powerful. But most never returned. Those who did spoke of strange energies, whispers in the dark, and a feeling of being watched. Ethan Voss was not afraid. He was a scavenger, a survivor, and a man who had spent his life searching through wreckage for anything he could sell. The galaxy was cruel, and people like him had to fight for every scrap. He had no grand mission, no empire backing him, just an old ship, a rusty blaster, and a stubborn will to live. But today, he was about to find something no one else had ever touched. Ethan stepped carefully through the ruined structure, his boots crunching against broken stone. The air was thick with dust, and strange symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly as if whispering secrets from the past. His scanner beeped, detecting something ahead. His heart pounded. Moving forward, he entered a large, circular chamber. At its center, standing on a raised platform, was something he had only heard about in old stories: the Eon armor. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Smooth black metal, reflecting light in unnatural ways, shaped into a form that looked almost alive. There were no seams, no openings, no visible controls, just a single unbroken suit standing as if waiting for something or someone. Ethan swallowed hard. He had heard of this thing before. The cursed shell, a relic of the past, a mystery that had driven entire civilizations mad. It had been found before, many times, and every time, it had rejected those who tried to claim it. Great warriors, powerful warlords, even the most advanced eye-controlled machines, all had been denied. It was said that when someone unworthy touched the armor, they were struck by an unseen force, their bodies burned with energy, their minds shattered. Some had simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but dust. Ethan should have walked away. He should have turned back and forgotten he ever saw it. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer. The air around him grew heavy, like the whole room was watching him, waiting for his next move. His breathing slowed. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out. His fingers hovered just inches from the armor surface. He expected nothing. He expected rejection, a blast of energy, a warning like the others had received before him. But then, something impossible happened. The armor reacted. The ancient glyphs around the room ignited with light. The walls trembled. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, vibrating through the air. Dust and debris lifted from the ground as a strange force pulsed outward. Ethan's heart stopped. He tried to pull his hand away, but he couldn't. His fingers touched the armor, and for the first time in history, it did not reject. The moment his skin made contact, the armor came to life. A shockwave of energy exploded from the platform, sending out a gust of wind so strong it knocked over loose stones and scattered the dust into the air. The metal surface of the armor rippled, shifting like liquid, moving with a mind of its own. Then, before Ethan could react, it moved. The armor latched onto him. Dark tendrils of metal wrapped around his fingers, his arms, his chest. He gasped, trying to step back, but the suit pulled him in. His body froze as the armor crawled over him, covering him piece by piece. He could feel its weight, yet it was not heavy. It was becoming part of him. His vision blurred. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then, in an instant, it was done. The energy in the room vanished. The symbols dimmed. The air became still. Ethan stood there, his breath ragged, his mind racing. He looked down at himself. The armor had accepted him. He could feel it, not just on his skin, but in his mind, in his soul. It was alive. It was speaking to him in a way he could not understand, yet somehow, deep inside, he knew. It had chosen him. The armor that had rejected every species in the galaxy had accepted a human. And somewhere, deep in the ruins of Sifos 9, something else awoke. Something that had been waiting, watching. And now, the galaxy would never be the same. Ethan stood frozen in the center of the ancient chamber, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The armor, the same armor that had rejected every other species in the galaxy, had accepted him. It had wrapped around his body, merging with him like a second skin. His breath came in short gasps, his heart hammering in his chest. He clenched his fists, feeling the smooth, seamless metal shift with his movements. It wasn't just on him, it was part of him. And then the whispers began. Not words, not voices, but something deeper, a presence, an awareness. The armor was not just a relic. It was alive. It was learning him, adapting to him, reading his thoughts and emotions. Panic surged through Ethan's mind. He tried to pull the armor off, but it didn't budge. It was as if it had fused with his skin. He reached up to his face, expecting cold metal, but he felt nothing but himself. The armor was there, yet it was weightless, like a second layer of existence woven around his body. Then the ground rumbled. Ethan snapped his head up, his instincts screaming. The chamber trembled, the ancient walls groaning as something deep within the ruins awoke. The glowing glyphs along the stone surfaces began to flicker erratically, as if reacting to his presence. Then, from the darkness, they came. Tall figures, wrapped in black, shimmering cloaks, emerged from the shadows. Their movements were silent, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They were not flesh and blood, not entirely. They were guardians of the ruin, beings forged from forgotten technology and ancient power. And they were looking straight at him. Ethan staggered backward, his muscles tensed, his mind racing. He had no weapon, no plan. These things had been waiting for something, for someone, to claim the armor. And now, they had found him. One of the figures raised a long metallic staff. It pulsed with energy, crackling with a force Ethan had never seen before. Then, without warning, it attacked. A blast of blue energy shot toward Ethan, faster than a bullet, aimed straight at his chest. Instinct took over. Before Ethan could think, the armor moved. A translucent shield of shimmering energy snapped into existence, absorbing the blast with a deep hum. The force of the impact sent him skidding backward, but he was unharmed. The realization hit him like a thunderstrike. The armor was protecting him. One of the guardians let out a low mechanical hiss. The others shifted, preparing to strike again. Ethan gritted his teeth. He had spent his life running, scraping by, avoiding fights he couldn't win. But now, he had no choice. The armor had chosen him. And whatever was happening here, he was in the middle of it now. With a deep breath, he planted his feet. And for the first time, he fought back. Ethan barely had time to process what had just happened. The armor, this ancient relic that had rejected every other species, had saved his life. It had moved on its own, reacting to the attack before he even realized he was in danger. The air around him crackled with energy as the black-cloaked guardians repositioned themselves, their glowing eyes locked onto him. They were not going to let him walk out of this place alive. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but the armor had other ideas. Something shifted inside him, a strange sensation, like a flood of knowledge rushing through his veins. For a brief moment, he saw visions, images of battles fought long ago, warriors clad in the same armor he now wore, standing against monstrous foes. And then, movement. One of the guardians lunged, its staff buzzing with energy. Without thinking, Ethan moved. His body reacted faster than ever before. The armor propelled him forward, his vision sharpening as time seemed to slow. He ducked under the incoming strike, twisted to the side, and lashed out with his arm. The moment his hand connected with the guardian's chest, a shockwave of pure energy erupted. The guardian was blasted backward, crashing into the stone wall with a deafening crunch. Ethan stared at his hands. What had he just done? The other two guardians hissed in unison, raising their weapons again. Ethan braced himself, but this time, something inside the armor responded. A voice, not a voice exactly, but a feeling, spoke to him. Do not fear. You are its first bearer in ages. Let it guide you. Ethan's breathing was ragged, his mind whirling with confusion. But there was no time to hesitate. The guardians attacked again. This time, the armor moved with him. His feet barely touched the ground as he dashed forward. He was faster, stronger, more precise than he had ever been. He dodged and weaved between the glowing staffs, his reflexes unnatural, inhuman. Then, with a flick of his wrist, the armor formed a weapon. A blade of pure energy extended from his forearm, crackling with a light blue glow. The guardians hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was all Ethan needed. With a single fluid motion, he slashed through the nearest guardian. The energy blade cut cleanly, slicing through its dark form. The guardian let out a metallic shriek as it collapsed into dust. The last remaining guardian stepped back, its glowing eyes flickering. For the first time, Ethan saw something like hesitation. It knows I am not like the others. The armor pulsed around him. It was more than just a tool. It was alive. It was choosing to fight with him. But before Ethan could act, the guardian vanished. One moment it was there. The next, it was gone. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. He turned in every direction, scanning the dimly lit chamber. Nothing. Where had it gone? Then, a deep rumbling sound echoed through the ruins. The walls shook. The floor beneath him cracked. Something else was waking up. Ethan had the overwhelming sense that this fight was far from over. And whatever was coming next, it was going to be much, much worse. Ethan stood in the ruins, his breath heavy, his mind racing. The last guardian had vanished, but the battle was far from over. The ancient stone walls around him trembled as something deep within the ruins stirred. The air grew thick, filled with an electric charge that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He could feel it. Something was waking up. The armor, still clinging tightly to his body, pulsed again, as if responding to the unseen force. Ethan clenched his fists, the energy blade on his arm flickering before fading back into the suit. Whatever was coming, he had to be ready. Then, the ground beneath him cracked open. With a deafening roar, a massive stone slab split apart, sending debris flying. Ethan jumped back, his enhanced reflexes barely saving him as a deep chasm tore through the temple floor. From the darkness below, a sound rumbled. Not mechanical, not natural. It was something else. Then, it rose. A colossal figure emerged from the abyss, a gargantuan humanoid shape, covered in the same ancient symbols that adorned the ruins. Its black metallic skin gleamed, as if absorbing the dim light. Its eyes, two burning white voids, locked onto Ethan. It wasn't just a machine. It wasn't just a guardian. It was the true protector of this place. Ethan barely had time to react before it moved. With terrifying speed, the construct lunged, its massive arms swinging toward him like a wrecking ball. Ethan threw himself to the side, his enhanced reflexes barely saving him from being crushed. The impact of the strike sent shockwaves through the temple, shattering pillars and tearing apart the ancient floor. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. This thing was different. It wasn't just a guardian, it was a warrior. The armor pulsed again, sending another wave of energy through his body. It was trying to tell him something, guiding him. You must face it. Ethan didn't have a choice. The towering construct charged, its massive fists crashing toward him. This time, Ethan didn't dodge. Instead, he moved forward. His instincts took over. The armor responded in perfect sync, amplifying his speed, his strength, his perception. He leaped onto the arm of the construct as it swung, using its own momentum to launch himself upward. In midair, the armor reacted. A second blade formed along his opposite arm, this one twice as long and glowing a fierce blue. Ethan twisted his body, bringing the blade down toward the creature's shoulder. The strike connected. For a moment, the temple was filled with a flash of brilliant light. Then, a crack. The construct let out a deep metallic groan, staggering back as its shoulder split apart, exposing the glowing core beneath its armor. Ethan landed on the ruined floor, his breathing ragged. It felt pain. It wasn't invincible. But the battle wasn't over. The massive warrior steadied itself, then released a deafening roar. From the walls, from the shadows, more shapes began to emerge. Smaller, but just as deadly. More guardians. Ethan gritted his teeth. He was outnumbered. But as the armor pulsed around him, as the energy inside it synchronized with his own, he realized something. He wasn't just wearing the armor anymore. He was becoming what it wanted him to be. A warrior. A weapon. A legend reborn. And he wasn't done fighting yet. Ethan stood still, his breath coming in short bursts, his muscles tense. The massive construct before him staggered back, its shoulder split open where his energy blade had struck. But it wasn't down. And now, it wasn't alone. From the shadows, dozens of figures emerged, smaller than the giant warrior, but just as deadly. They moved in unison, their metallic bodies gleaming, their glowing eyes locked onto him. Ethan's fingers curled into fists. His armor pulsed again, a steady rhythm against his skin, as if speaking to him. You are ready. The realization hit him. This wasn't just a fight. This was the final test. If he could survive this, if he could prove himself, then the armor would accept him. Fully. The first enemy charge. Ethan reacted instantly. His body moved before his mind could catch up. He sidestepped the first strike, his blade igniting in a flash of blue energy. With one swift motion, he sliced through the enemy's chest. Sparks exploded from the wound, and the guardian collapsed, its body twitching before it went still. But there was no time to breathe. Another enemy attacked. Then another. They came from all sides, too fast, too many. Ethan fought like a man possessed. His blades flashed, cutting through metal and energy alike. His armor absorbed impacts, redirected blows, enhanced his movements. He dodged, countered, struck back. And still, they kept coming. A heavy fist smashed into his side, sending him crashing against a crumbling pillar. The impact sent pain shooting through his ribs, but the armor held. He forced himself up just in time to block another strike, his blade meeting steel with a burst of sparks. Then he saw it. The giant construct was moving again. It raised its massive arm, and the symbols on its body began to glow. A deep hum filled the temple. Ethan's heart pounded. It was preparing something big. He had to end this. Now. The armor responded. Ethan felt it. A surge of power unlike anything before. His vision sharpened. Time seemed to slow. The armor wasn't holding back anymore. This is your moment. He ran forward. The remaining guardians lunged, but they were too slow. Ethan's speed had doubled, tripled. He weaved between them, his blades cutting them down with ruthless precision. The last guardian fell. Now only the giant remained. It roared, raising its arm high above Ethan. The energy within it crackled, charged with destructive force. Ethan didn't stop. He leaped. As he soared through the air, the armor shifted again. A new weapon formed, a spear of pure blue light, humming with power. Ethan gripped it tightly as he twisted his body in midair. Then, with all his strength, he hurled it forward. The spear pierced the giant's chest. For a moment, time froze. Then, the construct exploded. A shockwave ripped through the temple, sending dust and debris flying. The ground trembled. The air shimmered with raw energy. Then, silence. Ethan landed on the ground, his knees buckling. The battle was over. The construct was gone, And as the dust settled, something shifted within the armor. It pulsed one last time, then fused to him completely. Ethan gasped. He felt everything, every system, every hidden function. The armor had finally accepted him. He wasn't just wearing it anymore. He was one with it. And deep within his mind, a final message echoed, one last whisper from the ancient technology that had chosen him. You have passed. Now, you are our last warrior. Ethan stood in the ruins of the ancient temple, his breath heavy, his body aching. The battle had been brutal. The guardians, the giant construct, they had tested him to the limit. But he had survived. And now, everything had changed. The armor was no longer just a tool. It had fully accepted him, bonded with him in a way he didn't even know was possible. He could feel it now, not just around his body, but inside him, a part of him. For the first time, he understood. This armor had never been designed for just anyone. It had been searching, waiting, centuries, maybe millennia, for the right bearer. And now, it had found him. The ground beneath his feet trembled. Ethan tensed, his hands instinctively tightening into fists. He wasn't sure what was happening, but his armor, it knew. A deep vibration ran through his body, like the pulse of something ancient waking up. Symbols on the temple walls flickered, then glowed brightly. The entire structure shook. Then, in the silence, a voice, not human, not alien, but something more. Warrior of the Chosen, you have awakened the last relic of our kind, the final weapon of our people. And now you must face what comes next. Ethan's heart pounded. A gust of wind rushed through the temple, and suddenly he wasn't alone. The space around him shifted, the walls turning transparent, revealing a vision of the past. A battlefield stretching as far as the eye could see, massive ships burning, titans of war locked in brutal combat. At the center of it all, a single figure, wearing his armor. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He watched as the warrior moved like a force of nature, cutting through enemies, their weapons useless against the power of the relic, the last stand of a forgotten empire. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the vision vanished. Ethan staggered back, his mind racing. This armor, it had been used before. It had fought in a war so massive, so destructive, that history itself had buried it. And now, after all these years, it had returned. To him, a new realization hit him like a hammer. If this armor had chosen him, if it had reawakened, then something was coming. Something big. The temple walls cracked. The glowing symbols flickered, then faded into darkness. The ground trembled once more, but this time, Ethan knew. This wasn't just some ancient memory playing out. This was a warning. A deep, rumbling sound filled the air. Outside the temple, the sky darkened. Shadows moved in the clouds. A distant hum, low and menacing, echoed through the valley. And then, he saw them. Ships. Massive black warships descending from the sky. Dozens. No, hundreds. Ethan's jaw clenched. His fists tightened. They're here. The same enemy that had once fought against this armor. They had returned. And now, they were coming for him. Ethan stood at the edge of the temple ruins, staring at the dark warships descending from the sky. The enemy had arrived. The same ones who once fought against this armor. The same ones who had destroyed its former bearers. Now, they were here for him. His fingers twitched, the armor humming with energy around his body. He could feel its pulse, like a second heartbeat. It was no longer just armor. It was alive. It had chosen him, not as a simple warrior, but as something greater. A defender, a weapon, a final hope. The sky rumbled as the enemy fleet positioned itself in the atmosphere. Ethan watched as sleek black vessels, each covered in glowing crimson runes, moved into formation. A massive warship, larger than any he had ever seen, hovered just above the surface of the planet. A voice boomed from above, a deep and commanding tone that sent vibrations through the ground. Relic bearer, you wear what does not belong to you. Surrender the armor, and you will be granted a swift end. Ethan exhaled slowly. There was no fear in his heart, only resolve. He could feel the knowledge of the past warriors coursing through him. Tactics, combat skills, strategies lost to time. This armor was not just a tool, it was a legacy. He clenched his fists, and the armor responded instantly. Energy surged through his limbs, symbols glowing across his gauntlets. His helmet formed a solid visor, scanning the enemy fleet, detecting weak points, offering him solutions in real time. They think they can break me, Ethan muttered to himself. They had no idea what they were up against. The first strike came in an instant. A beam of energy, fired from one of the smaller ships, aimed straight for him. The armor reacted before he could think. A barrier of pure force erupted around him, deflecting the blast effortlessly. Then the ground shook. Troop pods slammed into the surface, hundreds of alien soldiers pouring out. Tall, armored warriors, their weapons crackling with dark energy. Ethan didn't wait. He launched forward. The armor moved like liquid, guiding him through the battlefield. He struck with inhuman speed, his blows crushing through enemy defenses. The aliens barely had time to react before he was among them, spinning, dodging, countering their every move. One warrior lunged at him with a massive blade. The armor shifted, forming a razor-sharp edge around his forearm. A single slash, and the enemy fell. Two more rushed him. He dodged to the side, kicking one so hard their armor cracked. The other fired a plasma bolt, but the armor absorbed it, redirecting the energy into his gauntlet. He fired it back. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Ethan tore through the enemy ranks with unstoppable precision. Every movement was perfect, every attack devastating. The armor's systems calculated weak points, exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. One soldier turned to flee. Ethan raised his hand. A pulse of energy ripped through the air, sending the alien flying backward. But the fight wasn't over. The massive warship above the battlefield began to charge its primary cannon. Energy gathered at the ship's core, a swirling mass of destruction aimed directly at him. Ethan felt the armor shift again. It had one final ability, a weapon locked deep within its core. The enemy had once feared this power. They had buried it, thinking no one would ever wield it again. They were wrong. Ethan raised his arms. The armor roared to life. The ground beneath him cracked, the very air humming with energy. A blinding glow spread from his chest, climbing up his arms, his legs, his entire body. The warship fired. A beam of destruction screamed toward him. Ethan thrust his hands forward. A shockwave erupted from his armor, a force so powerful, so absolute, that the energy beam twisted in midair, bending, warping, then shattering. The explosion ripped through the sky, tearing through the enemy fleet. Smaller ships disintegrated instantly. The massive warship trembled, its structure failing. And then, it detonated. The blast shook the heavens. Ethan stood at the center of it all, untouched, victorious. The remaining enemy forces, those who survived, fled. Their greatest weapon had failed. The relic, the armor they had once tried to bury, had returned, and now it belonged to a human.